I swear, every time I say it, someone wants to fist fight me. Driven Mofos, welcome back to another episode of The Underestimated Entrepreneur. Let's talk about something that almost gets me in a fist fight every time I talk about it, especially in the corporate business world or in the psychology space. And what I'm talking about is personality profiling or personality tests. Now, sometimes they might be called a persona test, but I just want to make this really, really clear. A lot of the personality tests are okay frameworks. Now, I've been saying this for years, and that is that labels are there to understand. They are never there to define an individual. But when I talk about it, and I recently just did some personality profile testing at the most recent Business Growth Odyssey event, and people ask me about them because in a lot of corporate businesses or a lot of businesses, they'll use these psychometric tests like disc profiling or the color code, what animal are you? And people talk about, well, it's because this person's a shark, whereas I'm a platypus. And then someone else will be going, well, but that's because they're a red and I'm an orange. And then others will be going, well, that's because they're a D, A, E, or whatever it is with the letter profiles and stuff like that. They're okay, but they're there to help us understand people, not to define people. And what I find is that way too many people will walk around and they will label people. So I've worked with business owners before and they go, oh, this person acts that way because they're a red. And this person acts that way because they're a blue. It doesn't mean anything. That's just your way of understanding how they operate. It's sort of okay because it helps you to understand them, but it's not very accurate. Humans change their behavior in different environments. I'll give you an example. If you take someone who is an introverted computer geek, right now we all know the type of person I'm talking about. They don't go outside much. White, pale, pasty skin. They sit in front of the TV all the time or playing computer games all the time. They very rarely see daylight. Now, that person there may classify themselves as an introvert. And so when they do these tests, depending on the environment that you're asking about, depends on the answers they give. So therefore, if you ask that person, do you like socializing? Do you like hanging out with people? Do you like talking to people? They would probably answer no. Now, if we change that environment, let's say we put them at Comic-Con and now they get all dressed up. They are highly extroverted. Like, I can't remember the last time I dressed up as a fucking wizard and went out in public where I was just walking around in public dressed as a wizard. And then I go and hang out with a whole bunch of other people that are dressed as knights and fairies and princesses and monks. Like, that shit happens at Comic-Con, right? Where these people get together. So in that environment, if you gave them the same test and asked them, are you extroverted? Do you like hanging out with people? They would probably say yes. So it depends on their reference point, and it depends on the questions that they're asked as to the answers they give. Now, the other problem that we have with personality profiling, which I spoke about on the weekend because I was challenged by a few people, and they said, well, what about this test? And what about that test? And what do you think of this? And I said, look, personality profiling tests or persona tests are very inaccurate. And they're very inaccurate because you're asking an individual to rate themselves based on certain questions. So if I said to you, do you like drinking alcohol? And I'm just using a general question. If you don't drink normally, your answer is probably going to be no. If I gave you that same test when you were on a cruise with 5 of your friends for a week, you would probably answer yes because you know that you've been drinking a lot and you don't normally drink, but in that environment, you do drink a lot. So we could say, well, yeah, I do drink quite a lot because in that moment, you feel like you're drinking a lot. If you ask someone, do you eat more than the average? They might come back and say, yes, I think that I do. Without hanging out with average people, they wouldn't know. And if you don't have a baseline, then you don't know how to answer that question. And so a lot of these tests are okay because they give us a basic framework to understand people. I might understand that in certain environments, some people are more extroverted and some people in other environments are more introverted. I might say that some people like systems, process, and structure more. Whereas in other environments, they might not like systems and structure. So I'm a highly structured person, but I'm also highly unstructured. If you're watching this on YouTube and you look at my bookshelf behind me, I am amazingly structured with my knowledge. But when it comes to day-to-day structure, I have a basic structure that I run off of, but I try not to be too anal with my time structure because I like to flow and adapt a lot. Jess, on the other hand, is completely different. She is very structured hour by hour during the week. Now, after hours, she's completely unstructured. On the weekend, if she's doing art or something like that, she's completely unstructured. So again, it depends on the environment and how well that person understands themselves. It also depends on how aware they are. We all know someone out there who has a massive lack of self-awareness, and we all do from time to time. But we're talking about a person who doesn't even know that they're the problem. Like when I look through my social media comments, the majority of the people who are commenting lack massive amounts of self-awareness. These people will be the types of people who call me a scammer, yet when you go to their social media page, they will be promoting all of these different charities and stuff like that without even knowing where the money goes. Isn't that sort of like a scam? Like if you're asking people to donate money to a charity that you don't even know where the money goes, how much of the percentage is used in administration costs, is taken for the wages of the CEO and all the executives, the board members, and how much actually gets sent to the people that are supposed to help. I had someone probably about 1.5 to 2 years ago, I think it was in Queensland, and this person, we were talking about this, and this person put his hand up and he said, I worked for a charity, and I think it was something like 97% of all of the money that was raised went to administration costs, which was essentially marketing, their sales team, because every salesperson that was, collecting money, they would get a percentage of the money. So they would get commissions. Then they had directors boards, CEOs, all of that stuff, and they're a non-for-profit. So they can't make a profit. They put a lot of money back in to remarket to make more money, which is crazy. It's almost, like a dog that eats its own shit. Like the more that it shits, the more that it eats, and it just keeps going around in circles. A lot of charities or non-for-profits, the more money they make, the more they have to spend. The Australian government and most state governments in Australia and councils do exactly the same things. If they're given $1 million budget, they have to spend that $1 million or else the next year it may get downsized. So they spend every cent so that next year they can get $1,200,000. And so essentially it is in their best interest to waste the money, which is crazy. But my point is that that person lacks self-awareness to see where they might be labeling someone else as a scammer, but without realizing all the scams that they perpetuate, whether it be health scams by telling people to eat a certain way without doing any research. It might be the scams of telling people to give their money to certain charities without knowing where the money goes. It might be the scam of telling people who to vote for in elections without even knowing key policies or how that impacts certain demographics of people. So what my point is that a lot of people out there lack self-awareness. Now, if you lack self-awareness, how can you do a personality profile test effectively? Now, sometimes when somebody does a personality profile test or these types of tests, they have a hidden agenda where they know that certain answers are going to help or hinder them to get a job. So it's going to be in their best interest to put down what they think is going to help them to get the job. So they might change some of the answers. I'm not saying that they're going to go from one extreme to the other, but I'm just saying that sometimes people over-exaggerate certain things that they know are going to help them to get a job and under-exaggerate certain parts of themselves or certain parts of their life to help them get the job. I've interviewed plenty of people, and a lot of people say that they're extremely driven, they're dedicated to work, work's really important and career progression. But then you watch them leave at 5 o'clock every night and they will not work 1 minute past 5 o'clock. But in the interview, they told you that that's how they operate. Like they're prepared to do whatever they need to do in order to have career progression. So a lot of people lie, bend the truth. Some people lack self-awareness. I know that I did one recently, actually. I did a personality profile test, a new one that I'd come across. And some of the questions, I actually went to Jess and I said, look, I think I'm putting this answer, but based on the question, I'm not really sure. What do you think? And I had to get her perspective from me because I found it hard to answer some of the questions for myself. All of these contribute to the answers. So then when you have a bunch of business owners that are hiring based on those personality profile tests and say, well, I think that this person's going to be great for the job, it's sort of a guess. It's still a guess. It gives a little bit more clarity, but it's not absolute. In science has a hypothesis and then it tests the hypothesis. So essentially it's saying it has a theory. Then from that theory, it goes and tests the theory to see if it's accurate and it works. And I love Albert Einstein's quote. He said, today's facts are tomorrow's fiction, which means that even when we believe something to be true, we have to keep testing it to see if it's true because things change. Now, when you're using these tests, we're not using a scientific model. Those personality profile tests aren't a scientific model, right? They are a way of understanding how certain things operate. A lot of things where we're working with people or in the field of psychology, in the field of human behavior, in the field of sociology or social sciences, yes, it is a scientific field, sort of, but it's a soft science. And what that means is it's very, very hard to be extremely accurate because you can't test something with exacts and absolutes. We could take a blood test. So you can put a person in a certain environment and then test their blood and we could come back and see what's happening in their blood. But if we ask a person to think in a certain way, depending on what's flashed up on a screen, on a monitor or something like that, you can see how their brain reacts, but depending on different traits depends on how they respond. So sometimes some people with higher levels of psychopathy, they might see something that is highly traumatic and they might not have a response to it, or they might be stimulated by it. You take someone else who has been traumatized in the past, like with PTSD, and they're going to react differently to that same traumatic image that's shown. It also depends on value systems. So you take someone who has a high value of family and you show something of kids being hurt or injured and they might respond. Someone else who has a low value on family might not really have a reaction to seeing kids hurt or injured. It all depends. I've worked with people before who are in the emergency services. Now, I don't like seeing people in pain. I can handle seeing people operated on. I've watched autopsies before. I have watched, surgeries and stuff like that, and I'm highly fascinated by them. In fact, one of my friends, he's one of Australia's top craniofacial surgeons or plastic surgeons, and I love watching some of the stuff that he does. It's phenomenal. Like, the artistic skill and what they do is amazing. So I don't mind seeing someone's skin cut from their face and having their face pulled over their nose, or, them replacing a jaw or shit like that. Like, I love that stuff. What I can't handle is the emotional response that people have to pain. That there freaks me out. We've had a heap of people who've come through events like Thrive Time, and they work in the emergency services. So paramedics, ambulance service, fireys, police officers, military, and so on. Now, those people there, I've spoken to one of my friends who's a paramedic who's come and done these events. She's a paramedic, her partner, a fiery. What they see is phenomenal. I could handle some of the stuff with being a fiery, but paramedics I would really struggle with. Going to someone who's fallen off a motorbike on the road, someone who's in a car accident and having to be cut out of it, that shit there would affect me. But I know that if I was in surgery and they were knocked out and they were in the emergency services room, I know that I could handle that situation. I can really handle it as long as the emotion's taken out of it. So now, how are we both going to, if we show something on a screen, how we both respond and the certain brain areas that light up are dependent on our values, depends on traits like narcissism and our altruistic traits, psychopathy, and there's some other ones as well. They're called the dark triad. So what my point is that they're okay to use, but just don't walk around labeling everyone with those traits. I had an old staff member and she used to just label everybody as those things. We would be in a conversation and she would say, yeah, but of course you think that because you're X, Y, Z, da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, it's not because of that. It's because it's fucking logical. It's a smart way of thinking through this, and I'm highly competent in that area. Now, she would have to label everything. That might just be because she wasn't as good as people with understanding how people operate as what I am. So sometimes if people are autistic and stuff like that, it's great to label them because it's easy to understand, but it also isn't 100% accurate. So just be aware of that, because that comes up quite a lot. And too many people rely on these personality profiles or these certain tests, and they're inaccurate. One of the best tests I've ever come across is a values test, because a value demonstrates how a person's brain filters the world around them. If you look at my values, I am going to be highly responsive to wanting to grow in the area of my values, which is teaching, coaching, learning, hanging out with people, especially high-level people, fitness and exercise and health, business and wealth creation. They're my top 4 values, essentially. So in those areas, I'm highly reliable, highly dependable, highly inspired. My energy goes up. I feel really good about doing them. I have better retention of information. So a lot of the time I can speed read a book and I retain a lot of the information because it's within my value structure. If you read books and you forget everything, it might not be important to you and you're forcing yourself to read something outside of your values, or you don't understand how reading that book helps your values to expand and grow. So that can become part of a challenge. But I think values testing is probably one of the most critical tests that most business owners don't do. Most couples don't do it, and it will show you how your partner operates. If you've got a business owner, they probably have a high value on business and wealth creation, especially if they are profitable and they've been in business for a while. If it's a new business owner, it might just be a fantasy or a delusion and it might fail. Now, if you have a person who has a high value on business and someone else who has a high value on family and they're in a relationship, you can already tell where they're going to have conflicts in the relationship. You're also going to see where they're going to keep going back to. So they'll spend a little bit of time with family, which will fulfill them, and then they're going to want to go back and work in their business, because that's where they get the most fulfillment from. Now, if the partner who has a high value on family does not understand that their partner works hard to provide for the family, they will see that their partner's work is in conflict of them wanting to spend time with their family, which then creates these huge problems. I see that all the time with couples. A lot of business owners I work with, their partners feel ignored, They don't know how to communicate effectively. They feel disconnected. Sometimes they might be going through relationship counseling. They might even be almost on the verge of a divorce, if not already in one, when I work with them. And that can happen by just not understanding the value structure of that person. I know for me personally, I love working in business. So if I had a partner that wasn't Jess and they expected me to spend more time with family, I wouldn't enjoy it. I can spend a little bit of time with family, but not a lot because it's not a high value of mine. Now, I do love hanging out with my family, just not a lot. I love hanging out with a lot of my clientele. I love hanging out with a lot of business people. But again, I don't see a lot of them super regularly. Like I don't hang out with my close friends every week. We might catch up once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks. They normally are in business. They're highly intelligent. They love learning. They love personal growth. And most of them are fairly fit as well. So they're the types of people I like hanging out with. If you have a clash in values, that's where you can have problems. Now, if you're building a business, having a team of people, you essentially have to hire people with different values. If you don't understand that, you're going to not understand the clashes and the conflicts that are going to happen within the business. If I want a head of operations, that head of operations needs to probably have a high value of structure, needs to have a high value of operations or systems or process. But if I have a high level social media marketing person, depending on the role, if they're doing Facebook ads, I probably want them to be very data driven. They probably need to be more introverted. Whereas if I'm doing more social media creative, I need them to be more creative. Now, the person who's running the ads is going to clash with the person who is more creative because one's going to be looking at data all the time and be more introverted and want to sit behind a computer. The other one's going to want to do creative stuff that looks pretty and nice and serves a purpose of presenting a culture. So they can sometimes clash. Then you have the operations person working with a creative. The ops wants them to follow the system and the rules, but they don't really want to follow the systems and the rules. They like to push it a little bit because creatives always do that. Creatives always want to take longer than what's expected, and that can cause problems. Now, if you've got a sales team, I was talking to someone today, one of my clients, and he said, my sales team always struggle to do their paperwork or to put their stuff in the client management system, the CRM. And I said, one of the best things you can do is hire a EA or an executive assistant or a PA or even someone offshore, right? So you can hire someone from an offshore country. They're relatively cheap compared to Australia and America. And what they will do is they will do a lot of the administrative tasks for you. So you can do voice messages, send it to them. They'll type it all up, put it all into the CRM or the management system, book the next set of calls. And so you can essentially have one of those per 3 or 4 sales reps or even one-to-one, depending on how busy they are. And that solves that problem. But again, if you've got a sales team, they might be heavily extroverted, want to hang out with people, want to talk to people all day, but they hate doing administrative work. That's going to cause a problem with the head of operations. So values is such a greater predictor of people than personality profiling tests in most cases. Now, the difference between a personality and a persona is the personality is who we believe we are, and a persona is the mask that we wear. The mask that we wear changes depending on the people that we hang out with. If you're hanging out with people that are really struggling financially, they're broke, and you make okay money in your life, you'll probably downplay how much money you make. Whereas when you're hanging out with people who are crushing it financially, making a lot of money, you'll probably upplay the amount of money you make, and they'll make you feel insecure because they're so far ahead of you. So we can change and adapt our behavioral responses depending on the people that we're hanging out with. This is really important to be aware of, okay? People do it all the time. They do it with family. So when they're with family, they might have a different persona or a mask that they wear than when they're with their friends. So if you're with the boys on the weekend and you're all getting drunk and you're at the strip club, and then you go home on Sunday night or Saturday night, get in bed with the wife, wake up in the morning when the kids wake up, now you're a dad. You've changed the mask between party animal, strippers, party, alcohol, to getting up with the kids, family man on the weekend. That's a different mask based on the different environments. Humans have the ability to change that mask, which is essentially changing the persona. Now, you can think that you're confident on the outside, but really lack a lot of confidence on the inside. That lack of confidence on the inside is your personal reality or your personality. So you can put on a confident mask and feel unconfident. The unconfident part is the personality, and the mask that you wear is the persona. That's the difference between a personality and a persona. Now, when you're doing a personality profiling test, sometimes, depending on the test, you might be wearing a little bit, some questions you might wear the persona, sometimes you might be reflecting on the personality, and sometimes you might be adapting to the environment. That's why they're inaccurate. The best way that you can learn how to read people more effectively is to do a lot of your own personal growth. The more that I have grown myself through personal development and learning and studying, the more I read people. And it helps a lot. Like I know at my events, if I've got 100 people in the room, I can talk about different topics and certain topics will engage certain people in the room. That gives me a bit of an insight into their values. Because if I talk about money and wealth creation and you start paying attention, that's because wealth or money is a high value to you. If I start talking about family and you start looking at your mobile phone and you get distracted, and this happens multiple times, then it probably tells me that you've got a low value on family. And so that gives me a little bit of an insight. If I start talking about problems at home, like in your relationship, and you've been sitting there for a good couple of hours and you haven't really moved a lot, and then all of a sudden you start to become fidgety, and now 2 days later in the event, I might talk about the same topic and you get fidgety again, it tells me that there's probably something going on there that needs to be addressed or something that's making you feel uncomfortable. These are called data points. A lot of people, when they go to study things like body language, it is highly inaccurate because you need to get data points. Different people do different things. There are some people who sit in my events all day with their arms crossed, and they will tell me that they've been loving the event, they've been enjoying it, but that's just how they sit. So that's not really an accurate data point. Now, if you go and learn from a lot of the people out there who don't understand what they're doing and they don't really have a good background in human behavior, they'll tell you that when people cross their arms, they're disconnected. That is not true. There is no evidence in scientific literature to say that that is accurate. Not that I've ever come across. If you find it, let me know, but I've never ever found it in scientific literature, nor in anything to do with body language. There are data points, and if you watch the person over time, you can start to put together a lot of data points, and it gives you an accurate description of how that person operates. Which is why if you're a leader or a business owner, understanding values and then watching those data points will help you way, way more than doing personality profiling tests and then labeling that person as a certain type of person. It can help, but again, you've got to get those data points, which is over a period of time, certain actions, behaviors, thoughts, emotions, responses. You put all those things together and you can learn a lot more about people. If you've ever read anything from Chris Voss, he is an FBI negotiator. He will talk a little bit about that. There's a guy called Navarro. He's an FBI counterintelligence agent or something like that. He'd interview a lot of terrorists and stuff like that, or people that would be serial killers and so on. And he would talk about how most people would mistake body language. And he says in an article that I use in my leadership event that sometimes people have misconceptions around body language and they bring that into a jury and they use that as their own evidence, which is called a confirmation bias. They're confirming what they believe to be true, but it's actually inaccurate. Again, if someone crosses their arms, someone might say, well, that's because they're disconnected. That's a confirmation bias and a belief that they've had. They've been given that belief. It's not true. It's not even accurate. People say, oh, when someone crosses their legs, it means they're disconnected. But that's also not true. There's no evidence to show that. In certain countries around the world, making eye contact is important for paying attention. So in Australia, we're taught that if someone's talking to you, you make eye contact with them. It shows confidence and it shows you paying attention. If you do that in other countries around the world, in certain South American countries, if you make eye contact for too long, or even Asian countries, it can come across as threatening. And then that can lead to certain issues, right? So you just have to be aware of this. Sometimes it can be perceived as sexual advancement that you find the person attractive. Who's right, who's wrong? It depends on cultural norms. Anyway, I thought I would talk about this because I did a couple of personality profile tests on the weekend with people in Business Growth Odyssey to show them that there are different ways that you can understand people. But again, I got asked, well, what about this test? What about that test? As I mentioned to all of the people in there, all the business owners, they are sort of accurate, but they're not 100% accurate. So you need to take data points. You can label a person in order to understand them, but never use it to define that individual. If you look at my days, depends on the day, you might see me as being more introverted. Then there are other days where I'm more extroverted. Am I an introvert or an extrovert? It depends. When I'm tired, I definitely introvert. When I am inspired, I definitely am more extroverted. If I run big, long events, I'm more extroverted. After the events, I introvert. If I've got a heap of shit to do in the business, I will introvert and I'll spend a lot of time on the computer and getting work done. But then if I can talk to people and lead people or do stuff in the team, I will do that, which means I extrovert. So it all depends. The same as this idea of altruism and narcissism, they're counterbalances as well. Sometimes it comes up in tests that somebody is more narcissistic in their traits. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. It all depends. It depends on the environment as well. They might be more narcissistic in their intimate relationship, but be more altruistic in the working environment. They might go to work and be a people pleaser, and then when they get home, they're really angry and frustrated at themselves, and so then they become more narcissistic at home. So we just got to be aware of these patterns. I teach a lot about this in my events, especially my leadership events, because it's really important to understand that people's personalities, their personas change, and it depends on environment. It depends who they hang out with. It also depends on what they think. It also depends on the amount of mental and emotional work they've done as well. Anyway, Driven Mofos, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's given you something to think about. But anyway, have a great day. Keep kicking ass, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Underestimated Entrepreneur. Most people waste their life, and I just don't want you to be one of them.